from Ottawa and Washington, off we go to Victoria, where a Porter flight to Toronto was forced back to the terminal earlier this week after a young child repeatedly refused to remain seated and buckled. The child and parent were eventually removed, but by then, the delay had pushed the flight beyond Victoria's 12:30 in the morning runway closure. So the flight was canceled, and passengers, of course, had to pay the price. It had already left the gate when the child repeatedly stood up and could not be secured in the seat. The parent and flight crew reportedly attempted to resolve the situation before the aircraft returned to the terminal. Now, removing the family and their baggage took enough time that the flight missed the airport's operating window. And the result? One child's behavior disrupted an entire aircraft full of passengers. Now, safety does come first, and the airline could not simply take off with a child standing or unsecured. So the question becomes, where does parental responsibility begin? The crew should not have to become substitute parents when a child refuses to follow basic safety instructions. And what about everybody else? Well, the other passengers did nothing wrong, yet they were the ones who ultimately lost their flight and their connections. Now, something I should point out here, Greg, is Porter's own guidance says children over 2 require their own seat, and Transport Canada strongly recommends approved child restraints for children during all phases of flight. So why does it all matter? Well, it's not about airline versus child, but the real issue is what should happen when one person's behavior prevents everyone else from exercising their rights. Now, there are a couple of things running through my mind, and as somebody who a number of years ago had a young daughter living in the United States and coming to visit me when I was living and working in British Columbia, her mother couldn't come, so I made arrangements with the airlines involved, and it was classed, the term was unaccompanied minor. And each airline would issue her a check-in with a special tag that she had to wear. And the flight crew was aware that, that she was unaccompanied and had certain responsibilities along the flight. And then when they landed, and in the case of in British Columbia, she was coming from the U.S., a flight in from Seattle to Kelowna, and getting to customs, and at least getting her to customs, and I was waiting on the other side as she came through customs. But there was that. How many times have you been on a flight and there's always been some bad actor as far as a little rugrat is concerned, and it just so annoying, and the parents don't seem to be, they might be just totally tuned out because it's that way at home too. But to me, if they couldn't get the child to settle down, and one passenger said it was her observation the child was afraid. Now, I don't know if it was the first time the mother had flown with the child or what the story was, but I do remember the first time that my daughter was flying unaccompanied, and she would have been 11 maybe at that point. She was having a tough time getting on the plane. She was a little bit frightened because it was, leaving from the East Coast and going to the West Coast kind of thing. And the flight attendant came out and looked at her mother and said, "Is she going to calm down? Because basically if she isn't, she's not getting on the flight." And I'm wondering why the crew was so understanding in allowing that to go on as long as it did before they made the decision back to the gate we go. And yes, they're coming off, but so is everyone else. The thing that bothers me about it too is if there had been more time so that the flight station control tower wasn't closed down, why even bother taking the luggage off? You take the mother and the child off, the luggage goes to Toronto and then comes back on the next flight. You don't hold up the whole plane and disrupt the other passengers who have all paid as well, and some who may have connections in Toronto that they've missed, and others who had to find hotels at the last minute, after midnight and everything. I wouldn't worry about the luggage. The luggage will find its way back. So, why waste time in getting the luggage off? Just send them home. But I have a real issue because I've been on flights, as I say, with little ones crying and babies. Well, if they're a baby and they're in the little crib or your arms or whatever it is that you have for the baby, I get it, but at least give them some Gravol or something to calm them down. But if a child is just acting up and you try once or twice and it's not working, then it's like off, because it's not going to work. It's going to be a miserable flight for the next 3 to 4 hours. So I don't fault the airline. I think maybe if they had moved a little sooner to get them off the plane, good. I know someone who spent a flight from Vancouver to Toronto with a 5 or 6 year old behind them, in the seat behind them, pulling their hair all the way, no matter how many times she leaned around and said, "Would you please stop?" and looked at the mother, "Would you please get your toddler to stop pulling my hair?" Psst. What do you do at that point at 35,000 feet in a tin can?
Gary, do you know enough about the policies around airports to determine whether or not there's an escape clause where they could have overridden the shutdown of the runway, or is it so tight that you couldn't call the air traffic controllers in on overtime and then make a case to the folks that govern flying between, say, midnight and 5 a.m.? In other words, so what if you go back to the terminal, get them off, and instead of closing shop at, say, 11:30, then you close at 12:30? Is there no escape clause whatsoever?
Not that I'm aware of, Greg. Like, that's a tower operation. And once the tower shuts down, that's it. Now, you might have communications with a branch of NAV Canada. It's called Flight Stations. They handle like very small airports. But if the tower is closed and it is a towered airport with an air traffic controller on duty, if that air traffic controller is not on duty, I think the airline is taking an extreme risk to say to the captain of the flight, you're free to take off, because the captain won't do it.
No, but I wasn't referring to that as much as
No.
You knew the problem existed if you got to the tower in time and said, "Look, we have an issue on board," which is rare. We're trying to settle this toddler down, and seemingly we're now 10 minutes, 15, 20 minutes. I don't know how long they spent, but obviously the time they spent, the ultimate decision came down to get these people off the plane. So that was a logical move. But because of another overriding rule that says you can't fly out after 11:30, or 12:30, whatever the time, then basically, didn't you see that coming? I mean, you see it in Toronto all the time, not so much in Montreal, but in Toronto, you're lined up,
Oh, you
you
see it
know.
in Montreal too.
Well, there you go. These lineups, and you're waiting in a lineup, and someone comes on the air and says, "We're 10th in line." I mean, does that mean if plane number 9 gets ready to go, but you have a drop dead time that we close at 12 and it's 5 to 12, then bottom line is plane number 9 and 10 don't fly?
No, because at that stage, you know what the airline schedules are. You know what flights, how many flights are scheduled for departure, and how many you may still have on approach. It's all a very tightly knit schedule, matter of scheduling. And if you have the opportunity to watch some of the live feeds, watching Pearson and Montreal, and especially when they've got they have two parallel runways, one for arrivals and one for departures, but depending on the situation, if they've got a few more arrivals banking up, then they may use the departure runway from time to time for arrivals. But just watching how that's orchestrated, it's really something to see. Now, Victoria, it's not going to be anywhere near the level of volume of traffic like that. But the fact is, the tower's open until 12:30 in the morning, and the controller is off duty at 12:30, and that's it. But
So if they accompany this problem at, say, 12 o'clock, could they not say, is there any way you can stay till 1 o'clock? Or is Victoria rules such that you can't fly out of Victoria because of the noise and those?
there may be some noise abatement issues in place. I'm not sure. I can't see it. I don't think Victoria is that busy of an airport, but it's just one of those things. This is the cutoff, and again, I go back to maybe the flight attendants have learned that we probably let this one go too long instead of just nipping it in the bud, and getting the pilot to go back to the gate ASAP. But again, still, it's going to take time to dig through the hold and find the luggage that belongs to those passengers. So,
And I suspect you're going to have a class action lawsuit because they're not, the airlines walking away from the responsibility of rebooking. They're not saying you can get on the next plane first thing in the morning.
They did work to rebook everyone, and I think they may have sent an extra plane out just to take that load out around 1 o'clock in the afternoon the next day.
Oh, I see.
But there are some people who are saying that they ended up paying out for a hotel and meals that they weren't planning on, and it wasn't their fault. And they're looking to the airline to reimburse them. Now, it's going to be interesting to see what happens coming out of that. Any way you look at it, if Porter doesn't reimburse them, Porter comes out of it with a black eye to match its little raccoon figure branding that it has. It's a tough call. I don't envy flight attendants now because you're getting more and more reports of people being disruptive on the flights after they take off, and they're midair and halfway across the continent, and you've got some bozo who decides to go off the deep end, or some woman who's not happy with something, and just creating more and more issues. You just never know. But in this particular case, parents have to take responsibility for their children at all ages. And once that child refused and they couldn't get it to settle down, whether the child was afraid, it was around 4 or 5 years old, whether the child was afraid or whether it was just being disruptive and not obeying his or her mother, get them off ASAP.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think on the other, I believe if my personal experience has anything to guide us on, you will see Porter coming through with paying for that hotel, only because if the disruption is made by the airline, there is a tendency of responsibility. And I think of the ice storm back in New Brunswick when we were stopped in Toronto coming back from Florida. And I happened to make a lot of friends because I went to the counter and I said, look, what are we going to do? And those were the days when they never thought of what are you going to do? And all of a sudden, almost instantaneously, they put us all up in a hotel. And if you recall that ice storm that you probably covered, Gary, we ended up spending about 3 or 4 days in Toronto at a hotel. They gave us meals for the day and vouchers. And to this day, people that I've met on the plane, when I see them, I say, oh, how you doing? What's new? We've made
Right.
friendships,
Sure.
So I think we're all in it together. And I think, I don't know, sometimes you got to pull and you got to tug and you got to fight for every inch you get. But people are basically reasonable. And this is an unsavory situation. I mean, the parent is in a situation, we don't know about the parenting at home. We don't know if the child had, I don't want to bring mental health into it, but they could have been, a child that's being treated for any array of illnesses that includes disruptive behavior, you combative personality, and you're quite right. The parents should take control, but we know parents don't always, nor are they always, the best to take control.
True.
The good cop, bad cop scenario, and they run, and how dare you touch me? And if you touch me, I'm going to call the department up. And yeah, there's a lot more. And I think you'll see the transparency come out as to how it was ultimately resolved.
And certainly it is a learning experience as to
Sure.
What to do and how fast you make a decision to deplane them. So with that, our takeaway is rights matter, but so do responsibilities.